Well, today, what we're going to do is pick up where we left off last time. We're talking about Kristi Burke, who's an influencer, has like 100,000 views, where she tries to justify why she left Christianity. And she has 5 verses that she thinks we don't have answers to. And so I'm going through one at a time. And last time, we talked about the whole predestination free will. So I don't want to do that again. I mean, I've done that to death. And so anybody wants to see that, that's already on YouTube. So the next one is difficult. I mean, I will admit that these are classic verses that evangelical atheists use. So that's why they're worth covering. All right, because when people, but an evangelical atheist is typically somebody that grew up in a so-called Christian family. Because I don't know, sometimes they're genuine Christian families, and other times not so much Christian in name only, but they're very religious. And they're very manipulative, and they turn people off to such an extent that they don't just reject their family, they reject the God of their family, and then they try to justify it. And these verses are frequently used to justify dumping the Bible. Now, as a young person myself, when I was in college, I would read the New Testament. I'd say, oh, Jesus is awesome, because I think I read the New Testament for the first time. I'd been a Christian for about 5 years before I read the Bible. Okay. And so when I got into college and started going through the New Testament, it's like, wow, this is awesome. I love Jesus. Really cool. Didn't understand everything. There were some verses that I didn't quite get, but overall, that was awesome. And then you look at the Old Testament. I took a class, Bible is Literature, where they go over the Old Testament. And it's like, oh my goodness, this doesn't sound anything like Jesus. Where's the love? God seems vengeful, and mean. How can this be the same thing, And there are verses that if you just look at those verses, it really sounds like he's genocidal even. And that's what we're going to talk about today. When the children of Israel went from Egypt into the land of Canaan, God gave them instructions to wipe out certain peoples. I mean, just kill everybody. Well, that doesn't sound very Christian at all. And she points that out.
The fourth passage that I had a really difficult time with, that I still cannot find a good justification for, is in Deuteronomy 20:10-18. When you march up to attack a city, make its people an offer of peace. If they accept and open their gates, all the people in it shall be subject to forced labor and shall work for you. If they refuse to make peace and they engage you in battle, lay siege to the city. When the Lord your God delivers it into your hand, put to sword all the men in it. As for the women, the children, the livestock, and everything else in the city, you may take these as plunder for yourselves. And you may use the plunder the Lord your God gives you from your enemies. This is how you are to treat all cities that are at a distance from you and do not belong to the nations nearby. So God is commanding his people to go around to all the neighboring cities, to offer them peace, to say, hey, we're giving you a peace offering. Would you like to make peace with us? And if that city agrees to being peaceful with you, you are to capture them and enslave them. You are to force them to work for you, to be your slaves. So right here, right on in the very beginning, it's saying to harm people that are peaceful with you, to force them to work for you, to enslave them. This is God specifically endorsing and commanding you to enslave other people, even if they're peaceful. Then it says, if they are not peaceful, then you are to just kill them all. Kill every single one of them, and then take the women and children as plunder and do whatever with the plunder that you want to do. Those are the spoils of your war. What do you think that means? Like, what do you think it was intended when they said, take the women and children and do whatever you want with them? And then in verse 15, it says, this is how you were to treat all cities that are at a distance from you and don't belong to the nations nearby. This is xenophobia. This is genocide. This is God endorsing slavery. All right here in this small little passage. There is no justification for that. There's no reason that an all-powerful, fully benevolent God would command his people to do this to other people.
Okay. Now, I tell you, it's a very good case. When you look at the face of it, if you only look at that passage, sounds pretty terrible. And she says, there is no justification. In other words, there is no scenario that you could make that moral. And see, this is it, is that if you have no Bible literacy, if you know nothing about the historical backdrop, and you look at that, your internal sensors go off, your moral sensors go off, and you go, this is terrible. This is an outrage. God is telling them to wipe out innocent people. What if they want to say, hey, live and let live? You live over here, we'll live over there. Let's not bother each other. Just let them be. You sound like Muhammad, okay, going in there and wiping people out like that. All right? What possible justification could there be? There is not a simple answer. It's a complex answer, but it's a good answer. Okay, so we're going to go through like 5 reasons why there was this actually makes moral sense. Can you believe it? It's hard to believe right now if you don't know what it is. But there was very good reason for what God said. So let me jump into them. All right, so here's the verse. Let's take a look at the whole thing because she left out some important stuff. So let me go through. I'll read the verse again, and we'll go through the whole thought, so that because he left out some very important aspects. Let's go. Deuteronomy 20. When you approach a city to fight against it, you shall offer it terms of peace. And if it agrees to make peace and opens to you, then all people who are found in it shall become your forced labor and serve you. However, if it does not make peace with you, but makes war against you, you shall besiege it. When the Lord your God gives it into your hand, you shall strike all the men in it with the edge of the sword. However, the women, the children, the animals, and everything that is in the city, all of its spoils, you shall take as plunder for yourself. And you shall use the spoils of your enemies, which the Lord your God is giving you. This is what you shall do to the cities that are far from you, which are not the cities of these nations nearby. So what does that mean? Well, it means what you think it means, except when it comes to the children or the women and stuff. So it doesn't mean it's okay to rape them. No, there are specific rules regarding the molestation of non-Jewish people. So it doesn't mean that you can rape as you please. That is not something they were allowed to do. So get that out of your head right now. She implies that that's no. There were, I mean, you want a woman, you want to marry her, that's one thing. But if you want to make her your only wife, that's fine. If you want to make some stranger your only wife. But you are not allowed to rape and rape and rape. That is not permitted. Okay? Now, with regard to, so what do you mean if they are far, far from you, which are not the cities of the nations? When God sent the people into Canaan, he didn't say, take over all of Canaan and kill all the people. He did not. He said there are 5 peoples, 5 or 6. I forgot the name of there. There are 5 or 6. Oh, here they are right now. The Hittites, the Amorite, Canaanite, the Perizzite, Hivite, and the Jebusite. All those other people, no. All those other people you are not to wipe out. Only these groups you are to completely decimate. The other groups, you give them a chance. Now, because they have been influenced by the Hittites and the Amorites, all right, because everybody's heard it before. One thing, as the Israelites are moving through, everybody in the region, we have archaeological evidence to back this up. The people of Canaan knew about the Israelites. They were called the Habiri. Everybody knew about, and we have documents from that period where they mention they're scared of the Habiri. They heard about what happened in Egypt. They heard about what happened in Jericho. They're afraid. Now, when they come in, do you want to be dumb and fight them? Or do you want to be assimilated? Because Israel, when it's talking about bringing them in and having them serve you, ultimately that leads to assimilation. When people get to slavery, they think of American slavery. American slavery was an abomination, where because of your race, you are enslaved for life. Because of your race. That's an abomination that didn't exist like it did here. Okay, there are some cultures that did that, but not based on race. It's based on we beat you in war, and this is part of the spoils of war. You become slaves. Now, the Jewish slavery, however, there was a time limit. You're only a slave for a certain number of years, then you're free. If your Jewish slave master mistreats you and you run away, they're not allowed to go get you. So you have to treat your servants well, okay? And you assimilate. Now, when you assimilate them, they are now under Mosaic law, and they are part of your tribe. So what you're talking about is we will assimilate you. In other words, you are no longer to do the practices of the Hivites, the Jebusites, the Canaanites, and the Perizzites. So you've been influenced by a wicked, wicked culture, which is the first thing we're going to talk about. You cannot do that crap anymore. You're now part of us. we serve the Lord, you will too. If you want to stay alive, then you can be assimilated. But we're not going to let you keep doing this. You are not going to be allowed to sacrifice your children in fire anymore. So only the cities of these peoples that the Lord your God is giving you as an inheritance, you shall not leave anything that breathes alive. Okay, so here where you exterminate everybody. Instead, you shall utterly destroy them. The Hittite, the Amorite, and the Canaanite, the Perizzite, the Hivite, and the Jebusite, just as the Lord your God has commanded you, so that they will not teach you to do all the same detestable practices of theirs, which they have done for their gods, by which you would sin against the Lord your God. So he says right there, look, I don't want any influence. These guys are parasites. You ever heard of a social contagion? Do you know what a social contagion is? We have one right now with this whole trans thing. It's a social contagion. People, oh, you don't want to be a woman, you want to be a man, okay, fine, and then that catches on, and pretty soon you got an epidemic of this. All right, I mean, we know it's a social contagion because in natural populations, this is only like 0.001%. And here we got some communities where half the kids are claiming that's a social contagion. These practices, there was a huge social contagion, and God he's basically sterilizing the field. When you go into these areas, I want you to completely destroy these cultures. So why would he want that? Let's go into that. All right. The Canaanites as a whole culture, these were the sins that were part of their culture. I'm not going to go through all the verses. I probably have done other studies on this, so we're not going to do that, but I'm just going to list them. Idolatry, temple prostitution. In other words, you worship the gods, especially Ashtoreth. Okay, Ashtoreth was very famous for this, where you have sex with the temple prostitute as a way of honoring her. Okay? Adultery, homosexuality, incest, murder, bestiality, gang rape, and massive amounts of child sacrifice. Okay? So these were the things God says, this is like the opposite of what I want. They're doing the very opposite of the things they're supposed to do. This is detestable, and I want that the entire culture wiped out.
Moses testifies about God commanding him and the Israelites to set out now and cross the Arnon Gorge. See, I have given into your hand Sihon, the Amorite, king of Heshbon, and his country. Begin to take possession of it and engage him in battle. At that time, we took all his towns and completely destroyed them, men, women, and children. We left no survivors. Now take a look at this picture. These are the bones of a female child who had been buried in a pit, her bones arranged in an unorganized manner. She was killed by being sawn in half, along with 2 other girls who were decapitated. These 3 girls were all buried under a ritual site, next to the skeletons of even more young girls who were killed, many of them burned to death. But it was not the Israelites who did this. The ancient city called Gezer was located west of Jerusalem in the Judean foothills. This city was occupied by the Amorites, who were descendants of the Canaanite people. Despite being massive in number and having a very strong military, by the year 1200 BC, the Amorites completely vanished from the pages of history. Why is that the case? In Genesis 15, we read about Abraham falling into a deep sleep. During this time, God appears to him and tells him that his descendants will inhabit the land of the Canaanites. However, this process would take 4 generations to happen because the sin of the Amorites has not yet reached its full measure. What is this sin of the Amorites that God is referring to? This is Robert Alexander Stewart McAllister. He was an Irish archaeologist. In the year 1902, he set out for an excavation trip in Gezer. As he was slowly uncovering the land, he noticed a row of stones protruding from the ground. So he started to dig deeper. What he ended up unearthing were the remains of a Canaanite high place, referred to as a bama in Hebrew. A bama is an altar that is built on a hilltop and used for idol worship and sacrifice. This particular bama in Gezer consisted of 10 stones, many of which were well over 10 feet tall. The stones were like pillars, and they were all arranged in a line going from south to north. Next to these stones was a basin made of limestone. Inside the basin and in the ground all around the basin were jars filled with the bones of young girls. McAllister estimated some of these girls to be less than a week old at the time they were sacrificed. The way in which they were sacrificed is even more chilling. In his careful examination, McAllister noticed burn marks all over the skulls of these infant girls, some of whom had even been cut in half. He concluded that during these idol worship ceremonies, the Amorites would cut their children in half or burn them with fire in the basin made of limestone before stuffing their lifeless bodies into large clay jars and burying them in the ground next to the pillars. McAllister drew a diagram of the site and marked every single jar he found containing the remains of young girls with the letter J. In this diagram, we see that there are 10 different places marked with the letter J. Underneath this bama, he discovered a cave with a flat stone that had been laid down. On the stone itself were the remains of even more sacrificed children. This form of idol worship was done in the hopes that, through sacrificing their child, the family would gain health, wealth, and prosperity. In the book of Leviticus, God commands the Israelites, "You will not let any of your descendants pass through the fire of Moloch, nor will you profane the name of your God. I am the Lord." Any Israelite or any foreigner residing in Israel who sacrifices any of his children to Moloch is to be put to death. And in Deuteronomy 12:31, he also says, "You must not worship the Lord your God the way the other nations worship their gods, for they perform for their gods every detestable act that the Lord hates. They burn their sons and daughters as sacrifices to their gods." Being descendants of the Canaanites, the Amorite people worshipped Moloch as one of their many gods. The way in which this god was worshipped was primarily through child sacrifice, offered by fire. God waited hundreds of years for the Amorites to repent of their sin, but that day never came. What did come, however, was God's righteous judgment upon these Canaanite people. In Exodus 23, God refers directly to the Amorites by saying, "For my angel will go before you and bring you into the land of the Amorites, Hittites, Perizzites, Canaanites, Hivites, and Jebusites, so that you may live there. And I will destroy them completely. You must not worship the gods of these nations or serve them in any way or imitate their evil practices. Instead, you must utterly destroy them and smash their sacred pillars." Was it really justified for God to do this? A non-Christian might argue that it was not just for God to do this because the Amorites did not have his law like the Israelites did. They didn't know any better because God didn't specifically instruct them not to do these sorts of things. But how can that possibly be a good argument when even the Gentiles, who do not have God's written law, show that they know his law when they instinctively obey it, even without having heard it? They demonstrate that God's law is written in their hearts, for their own conscience and thoughts either accuse them or tell them that they are doing right. Did the Amorites know that what they were doing was wrong? Of course they did.
Yeah, I'm not going to argue with it there. Gee, is it wrong to burn my infant child and cut them in half? Dumb. And they did it in mass.
All right. So that was, that's one of the things. And just those other practices that we went through, these were done with regularity. So God waited 400 years before he took action. Now, why didn't he just zap them from heaven? He could have done that. He chose to use the Israelites instead. I don't have an answer for that question. I have speculations, but not an answer. I can't answer that stuff. But the fact is, he used Israel as his hand to take out these people. So that's reason number one. Their practices were, everything God hated in the name of God. Now, interestingly, we do have, since the excavations of a particular library in that region, we have a lot of documents from these Canaanite people. We have their Bible. So we know where that whole story of Moloch came from. I forgot the name of the king, and I've talked about this before.
who was he was the king of Jerusalem, one of the very first kings of Jerusalem. And there was a really bad drought in the land. Now, at that time, it was believed that Baal had died temporarily. Baal was in conflict with Mot, and he lost the conflict. And so Baal was believed to have died for a short time. And his son Moloch took over. While there was a huge drought in the land, and nobody could get any rain, people were dying. And so the king somehow figured out that if he sacrificed his son in fire to Moloch, it would rain. And it worked. And based on that little parable that I just told you, they started sacrificing their children right, left, and center. Now, did this legend start the sacrifice, or was it written later to justify the sacrifice? Who knows? But that it was encoded in their religion. And so for liberal scholars to say, well, did that really happen? Did they really practice child sacrifice? Number one, we've got the archaeological evidence. We dug it up. We can see what they did. It's in their own documents. The Bible records it back, front, and sideways. So the evidence, I would say, is not minor. The evidence is overwhelming that they did this very thing. So they were morally disgusting. Okay? Now, the question comes, well, the women and the children, though. Well, he's sterilized. He wants no remnant of this culture left. There is another reason, though, so I want you to hang out with that. So it's not just were these innocent women and children. Keep that in mind, because as we're going along, we're going to discuss the fact that they were not innocent women and children, not human women and children, at least.
Obviously, the world isn't like Eden. People don't treat each other as equal imagers of God. Not even close. What happened? The answer lies in God's decision to share his attributes with both his supernatural and human children. And one of those attributes is freedom, or free will. It is freedom, not mere intelligence, that allows for meaningful choices. God didn't program his children like robots. If he did, we wouldn't truly be like him. Having freedom meant God's children might choose to rebel. And that's what happened.
Remember, we don't have God's perfect nature, even though both humans and the heavenly sons of God represent him in their respective realm. God tells us in Job 15 that he doesn't trust his holy ones. He knows they can fail.
Look, he does not trust his holy ones, and the heavens are not clean in his eyes.
Eden was the home and headquarters of God. His supernatural and earthly families resided there. God wanted them to image him in their own ways. Heaven and earth blended together into one family, but one family member didn't like that idea.
We've all heard about the serpent in Eden, but why a serpent? What's that supposed to tell us? Ancient people knew how to take this scene, but we don't. We assume the serpent is merely an animal. His form is important, but the story is not about zoology. The story is about a supernatural rebellion. Isaiah alludes to that rebellion.
I will raise up my throne above the stars of God, and I will sit on the mountain of assembly. I will make myself like the Most High.
Isaiah is talking about the sons of God in the assembly. Just like Job, he refers to them as stars. They were present before Eden. Ezekiel 28 mentions the rebellion in Eden as well. In Ezekiel's case, a guardian cherub gets kicked out of Eden.
You were an anointed guardian cherub, and I placed you on God's holy mountain. You walked in the midst of stones of fire.
Ancient Mesopotamian tablets talk about cherub throne guardians and describe them as snakes and dragons. The Serpent of Eden was actually a supernatural being whose job was to guard God's throne. An ancient person would have known the scene was about a rebel in the divine council.
Like the supernatural rebel, Adam and Eve rebelled too. Eden was lost. The rebel security guard was cast down. He brought death to earth and now everyone would die.
The first, there were 3 rebellions by the sons of God. So we think of them as called angels, right? Angel is just it's one job description for God's first family. And so there were cherubs and all kinds, and angels and everything. And then there was archangels. So they had different ranks and so forth. So Lucifer was apparently one of those guardian cherubs. And he was the first one, as far as we know, to actually rebel. Says, you know what, God, now here's speculation. Probably not terribly happy that God makes a new family. So the angels, the first family, they were his sons and daughters, whatever, okay. And then he makes humanity. He says, I want some more children. And Lucifer's like, they're not worthy of you. And we know that because of Job. You know, that scene where God and Job are talking, and it's like, God says, oh, consider my servant Job, what a great guy. And Lucifer's like, yeah, you give him everything he wants. You make him suffer, and he's going to curse you to your face, dude. All right? So Lucifer, you get right there. It's like, okay, I do not approve of you inviting man into our family. Man is inferior. He's inferior. He's not worth you. So he's an adversary. So this, as far as we know, biblically, this was the first rebellion where Lucifer pushed man to sin, presumably to show God that he's not worthy. Okay? There were 2 more rebellions.
Genesis 6 describes the second supernatural rebellion. Some of the sons of God, members of the heavenly council, transgress the boundary between heaven and earth.
The sons of God saw the daughters of humankind, that they were beautiful. The Nephilim were upon the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God went into the daughters of humankind, and they bore children to them.
Both Peter and Jude reference this story in the New Testament.
God did not spare the angels who sinned, but held them captive in Tartarus with chains of darkness and handed them over to be kept for judgment, and did not spare the ancient world, but preserved Noah.
Jude also tells us about the judgment of these angels.
The angels who did not keep to their own domain, but deserted their proper dwelling place, he is kept in eternal bonds under deep gloom for the judgment of the great day.
Both of these writers understood that Genesis 6 recorded the second supernatural rebellion. The fallen sons of God were sent to Tartarus for their transgression. Tartarus is a Greek word for the realm of the dead, what we think of as hell. They'd stay there until the day of the Lord, at the end of days. A term like fallen angels makes us think of demons like the ones Jesus cast out. But the rebels of Genesis 6 are imprisoned, so they can't be the demons Jesus encountered. So where did they come from? The answer lies in the offspring produced by the forbidden union between the sons of God and the women in Genesis 6. Those offspring were known as the Nephilim. They were giants. Their descendants became the giant clans Moses and Joshua battled.
The Nephilim were upon the earth in those days, and also afterward.
In the books of Numbers and Deuteronomy, we learn about the giants Moses and Joshua ran into. They not only descended from the Nephilim, but they are called by other names like Anakim and the Rephaim. That last name stands out. Several Bible passages describe the dead spirits of the Rephaim in the realm of the dead, again what we would think of as hell.
Extra-biblical Jewish writers believe that demons, like those described in the Gospels, were disembodied spirits of the giants. They base this on the Bible's mention of dead Rephaim in the underworld. Jewish books like 1st Enoch and the Book of the Giants from the Dead Sea Scrolls make that point explicitly.
If demons come from dead giants, what happened to the giants? Believe it or not, the answer comes from a very familiar story. God told Joshua to destroy entire populations in the land of Canaan. But if you read the conquest account closely, you'll also see places where God told Joshua only drive them out, not kill them. Now this seems inconsistent. However, when you understand the supernatural rationale for what God wanted Joshua to do, things become more clear.
It's fascinating to discover that the conquest actually began with the giants. Moses initially sent 12 spies into the land. They reported about the places they had visited and where they saw the giant Anakim. 10 of the 12 spies convinced the rest of the people they could not win against the Anakim. God judged Israel with 40 years of wandering. Notice that the giants were a focal point from the very beginning of the conquest effort.
At the end of the 40 years, God took Israel up through the east side of the Jordan. He told them not to bother the people of Moab and Ammon, since the giant clans in those lands had already been removed by the people of Esau, relatives of the Israelites. God sent Moses and Joshua to Bashan, the realm of Og, king of the Amorites. Og was a giant, the last of the Rephaim. The prophet Amos described them.
I destroyed the Amorite before them, who was as tall as cedars and was as strong as the oaks.
The point is that once all the giants from the other side of the Jordan were removed, Joshua could take the people into Canaan. Joshua took the Israelites into the land. It's important to notice that the places that were designated for total destruction correspond to the places where the giants were seen. The giant descendants of the Nephilim were the real targets of the killing. Many people died because the Anakim lived among them, but the descendants of the Nephilim were the lethal threat.
The Nephilim and their descendants were from the divine rebellion of Genesis 6. They had been raised up by supernatural rebels to oppose God and destroy his people. Now in this light, the conquest is spiritual warfare played out on earth. Either God's people, Israel, would survive or be annihilated.
Okay, so we can glean a lot from this particular section. One thing, for people that want to interpret the Bible literal all the time, when it talks about the Anakim being as tall as cedars, no human's ever been as tall as a cedar tree. It's using hyperbole. The Bible does that. And so, like last week, we talked about the way she interprets the Bible is she would say every sentence and is, well, if it's not literal, it's wrong. It's like, okay, the Bible speaks the way humans do. Hyperbole is used all the time. When it says they were tall as Caesars, that means they were really big. Okay, they were very, very big. They were giants. So how did these people get to be giants? They were related to the Nephilim. They had Nephilim DNA. All right? Now think about it. If the direct Nephilim died and their spirits became demons, you ever wonder why? I used to wonder this when somebody would have a demon possession. They just became very vulgar, sexual crap and stuff like that. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense to me, because if you're a fallen angel, you guys don't have sex in heaven. All right? I don't even know if you have sexual parts. So why would a fallen angel be gross and organic and sexual? That makes no sense to me. But when I heard this, so you're saying that the half human, half angel. So they lit, and when you read the book of Enoch and you see before they died, what were the Nephilim doing? They were disgusting. They were raping every girl they could find. They were eating not only humans, they were eating each other. They were very disgusting. They basically indulged their animal natures. They went all out. So when they die, their spirits retain that carnality. And so when people had a demon possession, these are the spirits. They actually are part human and part angel, but they're all evil. And so their descendants are throughout the land of Canaan.
All of those tribes were mixed in with the Anakim, okay? And those are the ones they were told to target. They were genetically related to the Nephilim. So their ancestors, their spirit masters, were in rebellion against God. Get it? Their spirit masters were in rebellion against God. So basically what I'm setting up here is they have an organic hatred for the Jews because the Jews have been set aside specifically by God and they all know it. Okay, so you cannot cohabitate. You can't live next to them and expect peace. There is they're going to want to destroy you. So it's either you or them. If God is giving you this land, you cannot have this influence in their land. They hate you. They want you dead. You need to exterminate them. Yeah.
Is there any of that DNA still around?
That's a huge topic. We'll talk about it at the end.
Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower whose top reaches to the heavens. And Yahweh said, Come, let us go down and confuse their language there, so that they will not understand each other's language. Therefore, its name was called Babel.
Now, this is a really familiar story, but less familiar is how the story is told in Deuteronomy.
When the Most High apportioned the nations, at his dividing up the sons of humankind, he fixed the boundaries of the peoples according to the number of the sons of God. For Yahweh's portion was his people, Jacob the share of his inheritance.
Okay, this is huge right here. All right, this is a very powerful verse because it describes what happened after the Tower of Babel. Okay, so people got together and they decided, we had it better when we were in Eden because people still remembered the Garden of Eden, right? And I said, Eden was on a big mountain. It was great. We got close to God. So we're going to make our own mountain. We're going to make this tower. We're going to get back there. We're going to force our way back into heaven. So I'm making this. And they're all speaking the same language. And God's response was, okay, if they stay together, technology is going to improve and they're going to be like us. And think about how much we've accomplished in the last 200 years. I mean, mankind has gone farther in the last 50 years than the last 20,000. I mean, think about how fast. Now, if that had happened earlier, we would have wiped ourselves out a long time ago. So God slowed down our progress by stopping that. However, one of the things that he did is this, they don't want me as their leader. I'm going to divide up all of these nations and I am going to assign my angel children. So basically, when he gave his children, he assigned the angels as supervisors. So you are going to be princes over the people of man. So all of these different clans are going to go into different geographic locations, and he assigned angel princes over each of those geographic locations. So these angel supervisors were legitimately assigned nations. That's where comes from, because those angel supervisors rebelled. They rebelled against God, and instead of doing what God wanted them to, they directed worship toward themselves. And because they were in rebellion against God, they did the opposite of what he told them. He told them the values that he wanted them to have, and they basically taught them the opposite, so that God would be disgusted with man. So what do we know? What did he tell them to do? What did he, when he divided up the nations? We don't know. God doesn't give us a lot of information on what he told the angels, and so we can only infer. Now, these are some of the things that I infer: basic construction skills, because they needed how to build houses, how to make clothing. Have you ever seen anybody use a loom? I find that amazing. To take a plant or to take the hair of an animal and make clothing, that is not simple. When you see how a loom works, I'm going, you're telling me people just figured that out? Because that seems crazy. I don't know how in the world would you come up with that? So I think God helped with that. All right, and then farming skills, and then core morality for civilization. Now, these 5 things, we know these are core morals because they're in every culture known to man from the beginning. So what are those values? Don't harm the innocent, treat others as you wish to be treated, respect authority, be loyal to family and other supporters, value and practice purity, dietary, sexual, and hygiene. So those are values that are built in genetically. So I presume those were reinforced. The sacredness of human life. Don't kill. And think about that when Noah landed on Mount Ararat, he didn't give them the 10 Commandments. The one law says, be fruitful and multiply, and if anybody kills man, by man he must be killed. Those were the only 2 laws. All right? Don't steal, don't lie, love the Lord your God with your heart, mind, and strength. We know that from Jesus. So presumably, this is probably some of the values that they were told to give to their charges, to the people under their care. And so they were giants. All right, they were giants. They were physically present. So we're not talking about angels going woo, woo, woo with wings. We're talking about given bodies. So God allowed them to have physical bodies. These angels had physical bodies, and they were down there to govern. Okay, but they were big. All right, now here's the table of nations. So the peoples were, after the Tower of Babel, the people migrated into these various people groups. All the nations of the world. These were the original nations that started it all. It's over there in Genesis. Now what he did is he assigned various angels to each people group. And so you were assigned a geographical area. You get Ethiopia, you get Egypt, you get Assyria, blah, blah, blah. You get Canaan. So what were the gods of Canaan? Well, you take a look at the false gods of Canaan. You had Baal Hadad, so Baal. You had Ashtoreth. You had Anath, all right, and then if you believe in Molech, Molech. So these were like the original gods that were assigned. They rebelled and they became very disgusting. Okay, but they actually existed. But they said, Jacob is mine. So I'm going to assign all you angels get different ones. But you know what? And he didn't tell them why. I am going to be the prince of Jacob, or also known as Israel. That one's mine. And then he assigned Michael, his right-hand man, to be the governor, but under God. So these ones are mine. The rest of them, now you're supposed to direct them to me and give them good values. But Jacob is mine. And when they rebelled, they remembered that. They remembered that Israel was specific. You wonder why everybody hates Israel? Why Israel is still the hatred? And what did they do? Well, there you go. It's spiritual. It's spiritual, because from Israel came the Messiah to save they didn't know that, okay? But through Israel, God saved the world, all right? He needed them to have that culture. The Messiah needed to come from that culture, and everybody got saved. So all the peoples of the world are saved, but through the line of Israel. So what the angels didn't know, they didn't know that whole plan of salvation about the covenant with Abraham and all this stuff. So they didn't know that was going to happen, but they knew probably something, if they were going to rebel, it's not going to be in their favor.
The book of Daniel picks up on that idea. It discloses that supernatural beings govern individual nations. In other words, evil intelligences influence the geopolitics of those nations.
But the prince of the kingdom of Persia stood before me for 21 days. And look, Michael, one of the chief princes, came to assist me.
Each of these nations has a supernatural prince, a term that means ruler.
Now I return to fight against the prince of Persia. And look, the prince of Javan will come. And there is not one who contends with me against these beings, except Michael, your prince.
Michael is the guardian of Israel. The big picture reveals that there is an unseen spiritual conflict behind the empires of the earth.
Oh, I mentioned Baal, Molech, Anna, and Ashtoreth were assigned to Canaan, presumably. And how some of this might be myth, and so we don't know. I don't know which of these, if all of them were actually assigned there. But we have evidence of these gods. We have their literature, so we know how they worship these particular gods, and they were pretty bad dudes. They taught the Canaanites some very detestable practices, as we saw. So instead of don't harm the innocent, they taught them the very opposite. Kill the most innocent members of your society, babies. Innocent newborn babies. You sacrifice them, cut them in half, burn them alive, throw them into the flames, and Molech will bless you. Think about how evil that is. It's like, wait, God said don't harm the innocent, and they're doing the exact opposite of that. So, can you live with the Rephaim? No. You're in their country. They are way bigger than you. They're hostile to you. You are the children of Jacob, God's people, and they are the children of the rebels. Okay? So it's not just these are innocent people minding their own business and you can just exist alongside them. They have a culture that is antithetical to God. Everything God loves, they hate. They are in rebellion against God. You are God's people. These two are not going to mix. Either you get rid of these guys or you have them at your back. I mean, think about what it takes. I mean, is it possible that your conscience can be deadened so you can take your newborn child and just throw them into the fire like this? I mean, think about it. I mean, you can do it, but you have to kill your conscience. You have to justify it. And if you do it enough times and see it done, and you grow up in a culture where it's done, your conscience stops being bothered by it. But this is a practice that was just so widespread. I mean, for thousands of years, this practice.
But there are verbs associated not with killing in the commands to take the land. It's not all killing. In other words, God would have been happy for a number of people to just be driven out or to be dispossessed. You don't have to kill them. And you get the references there. You get some in Exodus, Deuteronomy, Joshua, again, Numbers, Joshua 3, Urash. It is a fallacy. It's untrue to say that the conquest was only about taking life. It is not. And all you need to do is read the text. Now, there are verbs of killing. There are verbs of killing in specific episodes in the conquest accounts that are used, not coincidentally, in places where Anakim, the Amorite, Rephaim giant clans, are located. I'm going to go through them. There aren't that many, but we'll just go through them. Numbers 13. Again, look at where we started back in Numbers 13, the hill country. Then you have the Canaanites who dwell by the sea. Who are they? Well, they'd be the Philistines, okay? What is the hill country? The report, again, tells us about the inhabitants of the hill country, Hittites, Jebusites, Amorites, again, so on and so forth. What is it? The hill country is basically, you can see on this map where it's hilly or mountainous, all the way up through here, from the south, the Negev, the hill country, all the way up through the side, through the land here, past Galilee and up into Upper Galilee. This is the hill country. All right? And then on the sea, again, you're going to have some Philistine settlements. You're going to have the 5 cities of the Philistines and whatnot. But again, there's a logic to it. And hill country is a consistent focus, including the hill country in the Negev. If we look at the places where the terms Anakim and sons of Anak occur, we get several more specific geographical references. You get Hebron, Kiriath Arba, Davir, Anab, situated in the hill country. Okay, general descriptions, all the hill country of Judah. The Anakim are not said to be found in other areas, just throughout the hill country. Again, including the hill country, the Negev, you get some of that. Cities of Jericho, Jerusalem, Lachish, and Ai are in the hill country, as was Hazor. And I'm mentioning these because these are the places where the Karem commands are issued. It's not Karem everything. It's when you're in the hill country, okay, there's going to be Karem going on. And it's going to be in the places where these people live. Again, the Anakim, the sons of Anak. Not surprisingly, towns, cities that the king of Hazor sent aid to versus the Israelites are also in the hill country. So they that's a very poor decision on his part. So he's going to loop himself into this, Though the precise locations of some of the sites are unknown, the biblical narrative associates them all with the hill country. Okay, and here we go. We have one kind of map over here, then you got the topographic over here, and you can see, you just look at the place names, they're all in the hill country. Again, there's a reason for this, because of who lives in the hill country. Because of where the sons of Anak, the Anakim and the Rephaim and all, this is where they're spotted, in the hill country. Again, this is not a coincidence. It's not coincidental. It's not random. If you look at the killing verbs, harem, in the conquest accounts, Numbers, Deuteronomy, you get it with Sion and Og. They're descendants, they're the Amorite kings, and we know Og for sure is a giant. Sion is probably as well because of the association with Og. They're under Kerem. Joshua 2, Jericho in the hill country. Ai in the hill country. Joshua 10, all these places. Joshua left none remaining. They're all in the hill country. They're all places where the Anakim were spotted. And Joshua 11, Hazor, hill country. Again, this is my position. This is why I think the whole point of the way Joshua wraps up the conquest, how he defines victory, is there are no more Anakim in the land. He doesn't say there are no more humans in the land. He says, no, there are no more Anakim in the land. He doesn't even say there's no more Canaanites. He says there's no more Anakim in the land. They become a consistent reference point. A couple other verbs of killing, avad. Now in the Joshua references here, it has the Israelites in view, that they're under threat. They could be destroyed by their enemies. But the lemma is used in Numbers 21 of Sion and Og, Deuteronomy 7 and 9 of the warfare that's going to happen once they get into Canaan. Shamad, to destroy. This lemma is used in Deuteronomy 9, Joshua 9, 11, and 24, all of the conquest, and every time they occur, it's in association with the hill country. Every time. It's also the lemma used in Amos 2:9 to describe the demise of the very tall Amorites in Amos's recounting of the conquest. What I'm trying to communicate here is this is a consistent picture, and it is driven by a theological rationale. Again, like I said with Joshua, when he winds up, he doesn't say, hey, there's no more humans in the land. We're supposed to just kill everybody. No, he says there are no more Anakim in the land. Except the ones that ran away to the Philistines, they're their buddies over there. There's still business to be taken care of after the conquest. We're going to run into Philistines later, when the new Joshua is in town. His name is David. Again, it's not a coincidence. We'll talk about next class period about the similarities, some of the similarities between Joshua and David and Moses and Jesus. Again, there are some deliberate typology going on here that, again, it's very easy for us to miss. So last slide, return to the fundamental questions. How would the ancient readers of the conquest accounts have processed these accounts? How would the biblical writers have thought about what they were writing? I'll tell you how they wouldn't have thought about it. They wouldn't have thought about it the way it's presented on YouTube. Okay, they wouldn't have thought about it the way it's presented on Facebook. There's a context here. It is live or be killed. Because it's not everybody that we have to worry about. We can dispossess people. We don't have to kill them. We can just drive them out. God promised us this land, and they either have to join us as Israelites or they're gone. But there are some, again, in the hill country, the descendants of Anak, that have a very long history that goes back to the flood story and the Apkallu and associated stories, depending on what their ethnic tradition has, their texts, the Hittite texts or whatever, the Hurrian text. There are some people who can trace their lineage and have done so all the way back to the second rebellion. And they form a lethal threat. The agenda now is not only to increase depravity so that we never return to the true God and have life. Now the agenda is to kill us off. So God says, we have to deal with that. We must deal with that. This is why I'm bringing you here. It's why I took you up the Transjordan. Okay, we've got to take care of business in Bashan. It's why you're going to cross in and you're going to confront the very people that made you chicken out in the first place and caused your 40 years of wandering. It must be done.
Okay, so there's a lot to unpack there. But one thing that he mentioned there that I thought was very interesting is that, why can't you just drive out the giants? Why do you have to kill them all? They're not going to be driven out. Think about their ancestors, the spirits, the Nephilim, that were, they're half spirit, half demon. They were assigned that region by God. That's been their home for generations. These giants are not going to allow the Israelites to just move them out. So if you want to live in this area, you have no choice but to get rid of this threat. So there are a lot of reasons. But there we go. So basically, in summary, why did God
order the extermination of certain tribes? Well, number one, they were practicing many things that were an abomination to God, including the slaughter of the innocents. Okay. Not to mention a bunch of other things. The people of Israel were God's chosen project. From them, the Messiah would be born, and they needed a home territory to have a culture that reflected his values, unpolluted by the evil religion of the Canaanites. Now, as a result, even the ones that stayed there, though, I mean, take a look. If you read the Old Testament, look how many bad kings there were. All right, most of the kings of Israel were evil. Why? Because of the influence of the Canaanites. If they had done, because they didn't really fulfill what God said. They left a bunch of people alive they weren't supposed to. All right, but some of those giants ended up joining the Philistines, and that's where Goliath came from. All right, so they didn't do a good job, and as a result, those very cultures did influence Israel in a bad way. They got the Israelites to follow after those false gods, the very thing God didn't want to happen. So they partially got the job done, but they didn't do it perfectly, and the very thing God warned them about actually happened. Okay? The Nephilim, Anakim, Rephaim were the offspring of non-humans who were in charge and legally entitled to rule that land since the Tower of Babel. They would not give up the land without a fight, which I mentioned. And then last, the Nephilim and their Anakim and so forth and their angel overlords were at war with God, and by proxy, they were at war with Jews, and it was kill or be killed. There could be no peaceful coexistence. So so when you go back to that original thing where she says there could be no justification for wiping out all those innocent people who didn't, hold off there. Number one, we're not talking about, you're thinking of innocent humans like today. They were not necessarily innocent. They were actually a hybrid. These were hybrid races mixed in with rebellious spirits that are not going to allow you to live next to them. Okay? Their culture is basically anti-God. I mean, God has certain values. They have created a religion that is like 180 degrees from the values God has, and he didn't want his people to be polluted by this culture. So does that make sense? Does that clear things out? Okay. All right. So yeah, that is, I think that was, it's a complex topic. You know, this is, as you see, when this girl comes in and she just reads this one verse and says, there is no possible way you can justify this. And it's like, okay, lady, there are justifiable wars. All right, if we had giants in Canada that wanted to exterminate us, okay, that wanted to kill us, and every time, you know, it's like, come on, you're gonna sit there and you're gonna be okay with that when they're attacking you, and you're gonna sit there and be okay. We're gonna live in peace. I don't think so. All right. It's a complex topic that will evade simple-minded people with superficial understanding of archaeology and hidden world history and the Bible. Okay, it does take, you really have to have a circumspect view of the situation to understand this in context.